I'm Debra Cheruiyot, a therapist by profession. Yes, and I've specialized mostly in addiction counseling.
What is mental health and what is it all about?
Mental health in general is specifically one's emotional, psychological, and social well-being of a person. That means that mental health, it affects how we think, we feel, or we act in general.
What are some of the causes of mental health?
There are a variety of causes that lead one to experience mental health illness, and of course different mental health issues. One of the things that is a leading cause would be the genetic factor, that it runs in our families. If a member has that genetic predisposition, therefore that means that they'll end up experiencing mental health issues. Another cause would be substance use. Substance use would also lead to mental health illnesses, and also environmental stress, things like death, divorce, all these, they cause mental health illnesses. And then I would say lastly, psychological trauma. For a child example, a child who experiences abuse when they are young, of course, that means that eventually they'll experience mental health illnesses, or accidents, neglect, or even a death of a parent. So that in general leads to mental health illnesses.
Will you give some examples of mental health disorders or illnesses?
For sure, there are a variety of them. One of them would be, I would mention depression. It's the most common kind of mental health issue or illness. Also, we talk about addiction. There is a bipolar disorder, personality disorder, anxiety disorders, things like panic attacks. Those are some of the kinds of mental health illnesses that we experience.
How can you tell that a child is suffering from a certain kind of mental health disorder?
Or some of the signs I would say would be things like you find that the child socially withdraws, they are isolated, and you find that in terms of their eating habits or sleeping habits, they are not consistent. You find that they have less sleep, eating in terms of their appetite, it's low or it's too much, shoots either way. And you find that they experience paranoia. You find that they are always holding on to things, maybe it's their toy, something, they just have a lot of fear. Yeah, and yeah, basically that's it. I would say those are some of them. And also irritability around people. Those are some of the signs that would say a child is suffering from trauma.
How can you tell that someone is suffering from mental health illnesses?
Early enough.
Yeah, early enough.
I would say for sure the difference between, example, mental health and physical health. You'd find that physical health, you'd find, example, if I have a cold, you'll find that I'm experiencing a lot of fever, or rather I'm experiencing headaches and all that. But when we talk about mental health illnesses, for sure it takes time for you to actually see the signs and symptoms. But generally, you'd find that someone, they start behaving abnormally, or rather away from their normal behavior. That is, if this person was a person who used to sleep 8 hours, you find that they sleep less or they oversleep. In terms of their eating habits, it shifts. You find that they experience a lot of fear, social withdrawals. Generally, these what we are saying is that their behavior is abnormal. It's not the normal as they used to behave before. Yes.
So who's more at risk of suffering from mental health effects or disorders?
Mm-hmm. People who are predisposed by their genetics to these mental health illnesses, those are some of the people who would end up experiencing mental health illnesses. Also, people who are experiencing, I would say, financial challenges. We would say poverty really contributes to, or rather there are those factors that contribute to one ending up experiencing mental health illnesses. Also, people who experience other chronic illnesses. You know, because when you experience a chronic illness like HIV or diabetes, it is a stress already. So that means that I would end up experiencing a mental health illness eventually.
What is the perception of the Kenyan society on matters mental health?
Mm-hmm. I would say, as the Kenyan society, people view mental health illnesses as something that is evil, or rather, in terms of, you'd call it bad morals. You know, like someone who, example, is experiencing addiction. That person that is already labeled like this person doesn't know God, doesn't love God. So they are labeled in that way that they don't love God. That's why they are experiencing that disease or illness. Same to depression, same to anxiety. It's as if people perceive, especially in the Kenyan society, people perceive those patients who are experiencing mental health illnesses as not connecting with their with God or their higher power, as you would say. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So what is the perception of the society or people towards victims of mental health disorders?
Mm-hmm.
How does the society view them?
Mm-hmm. So I would say these mental health patients, I would call them patients, you find that the society in general shows them a lot of stigma, or rather stereotypes them, and therefore eventually making these people feel like they are sidelined. So a lot of stigma is what they receive from the society. That's what I would say. Mm-hmm.
So how can this perception be neutralized, or how can it be solved generally?
Mm-hmm. I would say a lot of awareness of mental health, because as I mentioned earlier, the society already has stigmatized them or labeled them as people who are evil, or rather they don't connect with God and such like things. So you find that in that case, this patient is stigmatized, and therefore they feel isolated, and therefore they cannot even seek for that treatment or help that they need. So a lot of awareness would help, and also the society in general accepting that this is a problem, just like the way we have accepted physical illnesses. You find that we have accepted and we know that this is part of our life. And so the same way we've embraced it, we should also embrace mental health. And therefore it will make it easier for people to seek for help, and even for speaking out when they are suffering from any mental health issue. Yeah.
I believe you have come across this kind of people who say that whenever I feel low or I experience something mental health, they say, I'd rather see a pastor than a therapist. So, what's your take on that? Is it right, or people should just every profession should have a certain way to tackle or a certain problem?
I like that question, the way you put it out, because one thing about, as I mentioned earlier, is that the society perceives these mental health issues as evil. And so people will go for solutions to the church and to the pastors. That you need to pray for me, I have depression, I have anxiety, or I have schizophrenia, someone who's actually psychotic, going to a pastor to be prayed for. But I feel like, yes, there are some issues you can go to the pastor, but mental health specifically, there are already professionals who can help these people with medications and also with therapy that can help these people eventually recover from their problem. So I would say that it is the perception that people already have, that's why they run to pastors. But in literal sense, the mental health professionals who are neurologists, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists are the people that people should run to when they're experiencing mental health issues.
So take us through a normal session, how you diagnose a problem, a mental health problem, and the solutions.
So what a good example would be, maybe I sit down with you and I start realizing that you have signs and symptoms of depression. What I will do, I'll do an assessment, which I will be able even to give you the results later that confirm that, example, you have major depressive disorder or whatever the issue that you have. So at the end of the day, an assessment is important, and then later on we come up with solutions. Solutions, I mean, they could be therapeutic solutions, which could range from behavioral issues and many other things, and also referring you also to a psychiatrist who can also help you with medications, because also depression, apart from providing therapeutic solutions, there's also medication that will help with your moods in general for a person who is experiencing depression. Yeah.
Okay. Statistics shows that in today's Kenyan society, more men are likely to commit suicide than females, rather than seek help or open up. Okay, because I've been talking to some of my male friends, they say that whenever I'm stressed, I'd rather go to Gong Forest to just scream, or I'd rather talk to a stone than open up to someone. Okay, what are some of the factors that have contributed to this trend?
I would say the culture, like example in our Kenyan and African context, the culture that men should be able to just be men, to be strong, to show that, not to show that they are weak by seeking help or even speaking out their problem, is a major contributor. And that is why a man would rather just sit down with their problem, even if they don't have a solution to it, they'd rather just keep silent. And therefore, you find that they end up being more predisposed to mental health issues compared to ladies. Because ladies in general, they would talk to anyone, a friend, a workmate, anyone you meet, you just talk to them about a certain issue that is stressing you, and that's it. But for a man, It's a different thing. So you find the cultural context has really led men especially to end up being more predisposed to these illnesses.
So how do you help someone to cope up with that problem that he has?
Mm-hmm. Oh, so in terms of treatment?
Yeah, therapy.
Yes. So what we do, especially when one comes and they have a particular problem that is stressing them, first we listen to them. You give them a hearing ear. So at the end of the day, when someone has been listened to, that gets their problem gets off their chest. So at the end of the day, you find that this person will start, first of all, they'll feel actually more relaxed compared to when they came into therapy. And then with time, as a counselor, my job is actually to empower this person, or rather to help this person look at their problems objectively and be able to know, how can I be able to come up with a solution for myself? So we don't give them solutions. We actually empower them to be able to see their problems objectively and come up with their own solutions at the end of the day. Yes.
On the matters of men opening up, what do you think should be done to encourage more men to perhaps speak about their problems? Yeah, because we consider weak.
Yeah, that's true. So I think one thing would be more information, or can I say awareness about these mental health issues, and especially men speaking out. You know, like in our profession, example, therapists, you'd find more therapists are ladies compared to men, even therapists. So for me, I would say finding a solution would and be encouraging these male therapists going out there and speaking out to men, to people, to congregations, and this will make other men feel more confident to actually speak about their problem. You know, so male therapists going out there, at the same time, people who have overcome their issues or struggles in any particular mental health illness, now speaking up about it. That I've found it to be more rewarding, because imagine someone who has recovered, example, from addiction, 10 years sober, and he's a man speaking out their problem. You find that another person who is experiencing that same issue would be like, I think I can go to seek for help because that person went for help. Or even another person who experienced depression or psychosis, whatever the case, and they actually got treatment. So offering these platforms for these people to speak out, that would really help. Of course, I would say most male clients, I would say in general, people have their preferences, men in general. There are some men who prefer male therapists, the others who prefer female. But mostly I've seen that because of also this cultural idea that we have about mental health, you find that most would prefer to go and seek a male therapist because they'd be like, you know, this other man, you know, when I talk to a man, my issue, it makes more sense compared to telling a lady I'd appear maybe a weak person. So for sure, you'd find that they go and seek out for male therapists. But there are other people who they have changed their mindsets and they are actually open to seek out for female therapists.
Can I force him to seek therapy or counseling session, to go to a counseling session?
Or if you can force them. I wouldn't say you need to force them. I think you can convince them to actually seek therapy. And especially now from your perspective, actually most people seek treatment when their friend or family has actually reached out to them and convinced them I can say in an objective manner, not like, you know what, you look like you have a problem, you go and seek for help. That this person will not go for that, to seek that help. But you convince them, you say, you know, it would be good actually to seek therapy. You may get more solutions compared to just thinking alone. A person may end up being convinced actually to seek for help. So I wouldn't say that you force them, convince them. You know, what I've realized is that especially mental health illnesses, things like, example, we talk about psychosis, schizophrenia, or addiction, are the best instances where I've seen actually people being forced, because it's a rehabilitation center. You go to a place, a mental health hospital, and you're there, you're receiving help. That can work. But a person, example, experiencing depression or something like that, because most of the time you find that people who are experiencing things like anxiety, depression, they just need outpatient services that they take themselves. So convincing them or even walking with them in this journey, maybe saying that I will actually support you, you can just go and try it out. If it works, that's okay, you can continue with it. So it's because you realize that this, most of the time, especially if this person is an adult, they need to come from a point of being convinced, or rather that making that decision themselves, not doing this thing for you. Yeah. So it can work for other kinds of mental health illnesses, as I've mentioned, but not for others.
How can the government tackle this mental health issue, or the society in general? Or should we leave it for the government to do its role, or should every person in the society contribute to eradicating this silent pandemic, epidemics, in short?
I think the society and the government have a role to play. Each and every person has a role to play. You cannot just sit down and say that the government needs to do their part only. We also have that part, because of course it is affecting us as individuals. And so I believe that every person has a part to play, and therefore like the society in general, you know, like myself as a mental health professional, what I would do on my part is taking out the information outside more. Taking the information out to people so that they are aware that these things are real issues. It's not something that just someone is experiencing. You know, someone might be experiencing a panic attack and they're thinking like, maybe I have another illness, a physical illness, as compared to a mental health issue. So first, as I've said, it's good for mental health care professionals to play their part, the government to play their part, especially in providing resources, because we really need resources out there to be able for these services actually to be to be received by people. Yes, and also in schools and churches, institutions in general, offering this opportunity of opportunity where if it's the students, if it's the churchgoers, they receive this information about mental health. Very, very important.
I believe this question could have come. Why is it important to talk about mental health?
I believe it's very important to talk about it because first, that's the only way someone would be aware first that they have an issue. And two, it will also help them to seek for that help and even know how to cope and eventually be able to start their journey of recovery. So talking is very important. Talking about mental health illnesses, very important in the whole process. so that the person can actually recover from this illness. So that is why it's very important.
Any parting shot advice, final remarks about this issue about mental health?
For me, I would say on my part, I would really encourage people to seek for information. You know, now that we have Google on our phones, any person can actually receive information about any mental health illness. And therefore that means that if I have information in my hands, that means that I'll be able to seek for help if I need to seek for help. So that is one thing. Another thing I would say is that if we can support, especially as a society, mental health, that would be very key. Because now, especially now, what we're experiencing in Kenya is that resources, we are lacking in resources. But if private companies can come up with these mental health rehabilitation centers, hospitals where people can be able to receive help, I believe we can be at a better place and even solve this crisis sooner.
One last question. Where can people find you if they want to seek help? Perhaps give us their contacts.
So I have a Facebook page which is Pambazuko Mpia Counseling Center. I do write articles on mental health, and also they can get me on my personal contact, which is 0714 567 126. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your time. You've learned a lot about this issue of mental health.
Thank you too for this forum. Yeah.
Wishing you all the best in your profession.
Thank you.